So we all good, everyone? I just got a thumb there. Thank you for being here today. Good afternoon, everyone. As always, we're here in the Press Theatre at the Legislature on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nation. I'm grateful to be joined by Minister Bruce Ralston, as well as Dr. Jennifer Winter from the University of Calgary, who participated in a review we undertook recently. Today, I'm here to announce a new oil and gas subsidy and royalty system for the people of British Columbia, one that will bring an end to inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, including the largest in BC, and put the interests of British Columbia. From rich farmland to dense forests to abundant minerals and metals, hydroelectricity and natural gas, we as British Columbians are blessed with an abundance of natural resources. And our province has done very well by that, but those resources have to be reminded every now and again belong to all of us. And for too long, the system of royalties for oil and gas has set us up to a situation whereby, rather than British Columbians benefiting completely from these resources, we've seen extremely large profits for oil and gas companies, while British Columbians have had to pay more for their heating costs as a result. I believe the system has failed British Columbians, and when we came to government, we undertook a review to ensure that we were getting the best possible outcomes for British Columbians, as well as those who live and work around our oil and gas industry. But it was clear as we asked Dr. Winter and Dr. Oleweiler to review the system that we heard time and time again that the system was broken, and that is why we're fixing it. By eliminating the deep well credit, the largest subsidy to oil and gas in British Columbia, we will be making sure that there is a fair return for these resources to all British Columbians, so that we can invest in their priorities of improving services, making sure that we're bringing down costs, and of course, primarily tackling carbon pollution. We believe that these changes are long overdue and are well justified in the current environment. For decades, the system has been built up to a place where it's almost incomprehensible to the ordinary British Columbian as to how we got to this place. And I'm very grateful to Minister Ralston and the expert team that he put together so that we could address this issue now in the fifth year of our mandate, or coming on to the fifth year of our mandate as a government. As we continue to make changes to improve the lives of British Columbia, we will also continue to talk and listen to people affected by these choices, First Nations, industry representatives, and of course, workers in the region, particularly in the the Northeast. But all British Columbians will benefit from these changes because we are now resetting the balance to ensure that the resources that belong to all of us are giving a return to government so that we can deliver those critically important services that everybody wants to see here in a province as rich and dynamic as British Columbia. So I'll ask Minister Ralston to go into the details of the changes, and he will also introduce Dr. Winter, who will have some comments about how we got to this place. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks. Thanks very much, Premier. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bruce Ralston, the Minister of Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation. I, too, want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Lekwungen-speaking people, the Songhees and Esquimalt Nation. We are here today to introduce a new oil and gas royalty system that puts the interests of British Columbians first and eliminates outdated and inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. This overhaul is long overdue and will replace an outdated system that was in place for nearly 3 decades. The new system is a strong result for British Columbians by providing a fair return on public resources to support vital public services such as roads, hospitals, and by advancing environmental protection and by presenting certainty for investors. The existing royalty system was set up nearly 3 decades ago. Since then, a patchwork of royalty deductions were introduced to reduce royalties paid to the province, including the Deep Well Royalty Program, which was created in 2003. Market conditions and technological advancements have changed natural resource development significantly since then. Last year, we launched a comprehensive review of BC's decades-old oil and gas royalty system to ensure it is modernized, aligned with the province's climate goals, and provides a fair return for British Columbians. As part of that review, we released an independent assessment of BC's current royalty system, completed by Dr. Nancy Oleweiler, who is a professor at SFU and the co-chair of the Climate Solutions Council appointed by the Minister of Energy, or Minister of Environment and Climate Change Strategies, and Dr. Jennifer Winter, who is here with us today. The independent assessment found that BC's outdated royalty system is broken and does not contribute to government and societal goals. During public engagement, we heard loud and clear from British Columbians they want a system that puts the interests of British Columbians first, eliminates outdated, inefficient fossil fuel subsidies, and is aligned with our climate goals. We're grateful for the thousands of British Columbians who provided their feedback, helping to shape the way we move forward. Today, we're delivering on what British Columbians have asked for. We are eliminating oil and gas incentive programs identified by the independent assessment as inefficient and outdated. Specifically, we are eliminating the deep well royalty program, as well as the marginal well, the ultra-marginal well, the low productivity well rate reduction, and clean growth infrastructure royalty programs. This new royalty framework will result in a better return on resources for British Columbians. Producers will now pay a 5% royalty rate during capital recovery, and that's the time at which companies drill and complete a well, a significant increase from the 3% minimum rate under the current system. Once revenue earned exceeds the upfront capital investment, in other words, the cost of drilling and completing a well, the producers will pay a rate that ranges from 5 to 40% depending on product and price. Establishing rates that are price sensitive will better reflect the value of the resource and provide a greater return to British Columbians. The new system will ensure the public a return of half the profits over the life of any oil and natural gas well. These changes being made reflect the excellent independent assessment completed last year by Dr. Nancy Oleweiler and Dr. Jennifer Winter. In their review, they recommended our move to the new revenue minus cost system. We will need time to provide for an orderly transition to this new system over the next 2 years, while taking prompt action to address the inefficient and outdated royalty programs. The programs will be eliminated for new wells, the ones that I listed, as of September the 1st, 2022, so just a few months ahead. One other highlight I want to mention is that we are in the early stages of developing an environmentally focused Healing the Land and Emission Reductions pool, which will provide the opportunity for existing unused royalty deductions under the Deep Well program to be repurposed to support environmental initiatives. The intention is to focus on those projects which reduce emissions or otherwise heal the land from the impacts of past oil and gas natural gas development. But only if these projects, and I want to stress this, only if these projects are above and beyond current regulatory requirements. I look forward to the coming months as we work in consultation with industry and affected First Nations to further develop the details of the environmental pool. As I've outlined, today we're enacting the review of BC's oil and gas royalty credits to ensure they will meet the province's goals for economic development, economic reconciliation with First Nations, a fair return on public resources, and environmental protection. Thank you. Now it falls to me to introduce virtually Dr. Jennifer Winter. She's an associate professor of economics and the scientific director of the Energy and Environmental Policy Research Division at the University of Calgary, and one of two co-authors of the independent assessment of the current system. So I'll turn it over to Dr. Winter.
Thank you, Minister Ralston, and good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I would like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am on the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. And the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I was honored to be asked to review BC's oil and gas royalty system alongside my colleague, Dr. Nancy Oleweiler, who is not able to be with us today. What we found in reviewing BC's royalty system is that, frankly, it is broken. Current system is overly complex, outdated, and is not living up to public expectations in terms of returning a proper share of the value of oil and gas, protecting the environment, and providing certainty to investors. I am glad to see that the government of BC has taken our advice. It is reforming the royalty system to address these issues. The changes announced today are major steps to overhaul BC's outdated royalty system, eliminating complexity and improving efficiency. These updates are, as the minister mentioned, well overdue and will replace a system that was in place for nearly 3 decades. Updates to the existing royalty framework will take place over a 2-year transition period that will begin September 1st, 2022, with the elimination of oil and gas incentive programs that Dr. Ohleweiler and I identified as inefficient and outdated. The government is eliminating the deep well royalty program, the marginal well, ultra-marginal well, low productivity well rate reduction programs, and the clean growth infrastructure royalty program. It's also important that government continues its ongoing consultation and cooperation with the First Nations who are most directly affected by the energy sector to ensure that this new framework includes their priorities and interests. I look forward to seeing the new system implemented and more details on how the royalty system will incent efficient production and maximize shared value for British Columbians. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Winter.
Thank Winter, for your preliminary work and also joining us here today to reflect on the outcome, which is this new regime which will benefit all British Columbians and help us address the challenge of our time, quite frankly, as we meet the challenge of climate change brought home so graphically to British Columbians over the past number of summers and then into the fall and even indeed into the winter. And with that, I'll open up the floor for questions.
Thank you. A reminder to media on the line, please press *1 to enter the queue for the opportunity to ask a question and a follow-up. For questions today, we will start in the room with Rob Shaw, Check News. Please go ahead, Rob.
Premier, it's been almost a week since you announced the museum. Fairly negative reaction to it. To what extent are you considering canceling that plan in response to what you've heard?
Well, I have to say at the outset that I very much regret that the jewel of our collective history, the Royal BC Museum, has become a political football. It certainly was not our intention to appear to be tone deaf to the challenges British Columbians are facing. I know full well the impact of high gas prices on the stresses of meeting family budgets, the challenges of inflation right across the board. I also understand that people don't always understand the difference between operating budgets and capital budgets. I don't expect them to, nor should they worry themselves about that. As long as government is doing their best to keep AAA credit ratings, which we've been able to do, I think the public should have confidence that the budgets and the finances of the province are in relatively good shape. But it may well have appeared to be an announcement out of the blue, but in reality, the Royal BC Museum has been in a difficult position for coming on 2 decades. And over the course of the past 20 years, the museum executive and board members have been coming to government, not just my government, but previous governments going back to at least 2006, to tell a story of a building in crisis with over 7 million collection items, which include priceless artifacts from our Indigenous history, as well as examples of immigrants coming to British Columbia to make a better life for themselves, in addition to flora and fauna that no longer exists as a result of impacts of change on the landscape. The museum holds our collective history. So when we made the announcement after 5 years of reviewing various proposals, it came as a surprise to me that the public responded the way they did. Again, I don't blame the official opposition for being the official opposition, but I am curious as to why they would have ignored this question for 12 years and then all of a sudden decide that it is a negative rather than a positive to the people of BC.
Follow-up, Rob?
Just to pull a Richard here and ask 2 questions in one, but to close off that question, are you considering in any way canceling or pausing this project in response to the negativity that you've heard? And I guess the second part of that would be, you know, the legislature is seismically unsafe. And I remember all parties pretty much saying, we can't spend money here until we fix the schools first. There's 250 schools, seismically unsafe. Some of them are twice as old as the museum. And they're waiting for cash while the government leaps ahead on seismic upgrades to the museum. So on both of those, I'm just looking for your response.
Well, with respect to the legislature, it is also seismically unsound, and there are school groups and children that visit the legislature year-round. But there are thousands and thousands, indeed, over the course of the past 50 years, millions of children who have gone through a building that has asbestos issues, a building that has not been seismically upgraded, and a building that, quite frankly, doesn't have even basic access and egress challenges in the event of something going on while those children groups are visiting. So I don't believe that the public has had a chance to fully understand how we got here. I think the shock of an announcement that was not characterized appropriately has led to some of the hard feelings. I'm certainly getting calls in my community, and I'm hearing from MLAs across the piece, not just opposition members. I understand the minister has announced that next week there'll be a full technical briefing of the challenges with the building, as well as a release of the business plan, which I have to say is not traditional in these circumstances, but the case is so compelling, I think British Columbians deserve to have a look at it before we get into the procurement process. But just to back up to 2006, when two governments ago, the government of the day was advised that there were seismic issues and there were challenges with the collections. They punted the ball down the field for a time and then started reviewing the matter again in 2010 and then again in 2012 and then again in 2013. And the real irony of the overwhelming vociferousness, I guess, of the opposition to this from the BC Liberals is that it was in fact a directive from the then Finance Minister, Mike de Jong, to the museum to come back with a plan. And they came back with a plan. There just was no Minister of Finance named Mike de Jong at the time. And instead, we looked at that report, as we did as a new government to a whole host of reports, and we took the due diligence over 5 years to come to a conclusion that to meet the challenges at this absolutely extraordinary facility with the collective history of all British Columbians housed in one place, we took steps to address that. We announced in 2019 we were going to do that. And 3 years later, we laid out a plan. Now, the response has been profound, and I accept that. But I want to assure British Columbians that we are not oblivious to the challenges you're facing every day. But government has an obligation to provide services as they're needed right now. But we also have an obligation to have a forward-looking approach. Building bridges, building transportation infrastructure, building tourism infrastructure. After 2 years of a global pandemic, the tourism industry has been hit harder than any other industry in British Columbia. And the Royal BC Museum has been a magnet historically and will be again in the future. That's why so many tourism organizations in British Columbia are excited about the direction we're going.
The next question comes from Binder Sajan, CTV.
Hi, Premier. Just want to ask you about the large rally, hundreds gathering outside, urging the government to take action so that people have access to a family doctor. Just wondering, what do you say to the people who are there who are concerned about that? And also wondering if you'd talk a little bit more about your meeting with the doctors of BC and where the money will come from to kind of revise and address some of those issues.
Well, thank you very much for the question, and I have a couple of solid answers to that because of the events that have taken place. First of all, I applaud those who arrived at the legislature today. I come from a background of dissent. Raising your voice is a political exercise that we all need to see. They came, they made their case, and now they've gone on with their lives. I got the message loudly and clearly. We met earlier, the Minister of Health and I, with the doctors of BC earlier in the week. We found a whole bunch of common ground to work with. I directed that the Deputy Minister of Health, Stephen Brown, sit down immediately with the doctors of BC, which he did the next day, to chart a way forward so we can address some of the issues that are affecting access to GPs and affecting our primary care network. So I'm very pleased that that is underway, and I have to say that we have a collaborative working relationship, but this crisis, and it is a crisis, didn't arrive yesterday, and it didn't arrive 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It has been building over time. And I had this morning an engagement with the federal government, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Intergovernmental Relations, on the Canada Health Transfer, which is something I've been talking about for some months now. The public may well not understand what that is. It's how we send money to Ottawa, British Columbians, and they send money back to us for services that have a federal component. And over the decades, the federal component of delivering healthcare has gone from about 50% to less than 25%. That's had a huge impact on the government's ability to provide services, which is our jurisdictional responsibility within the Canadian Federation. So I am the head of the Council of the Federation currently, and so I've been tasked by premiers across the country to engage with the federal government. I've been doing that over the past number of months, and just this morning had yet another engagement with two other colleagues from Saskatchewan and from Newfoundland to further solidify our arguments and to get some progress with the federal government. How will we address the crisis in healthcare? Certainly by supporting our frontline workers who have gone through the past 2 years that none of us could have imagined ever happening to us. But think about those healthcare workers who, despite risks to themselves and their families, went to work each and every day to keep British Columbians well. We need to support them, and we do that by having human resource strategies that will bring in more doctors, more nurses, more nurse practitioners, more care aides, right through the acute care and into the primary care system. We can't do that without an infusion of cash. The federal government is starting to come around to that, and I'm hopeful we can have a new vision for healthcare in the 21st century that includes a federal government that's fully participating in the delivery of these services by funding them adequately. And that's our way forward, and I'm optimistic. We've made progress, but we've got more work to do.
Binder, do you have a follow-up?
Yes, and so if the feds don't step up, can BC go it alone? And on a separate topic, soccer. There's a match, a friendly happening in Vancouver, the Canadian team and Duran, and I'm just wondering what you think about that.
Well, on the where do we go if the Canada Health transfer talks fail? Well, I don't want to imagine that, because I believe that Canadians from coast to coast to coast have an expectation that when they elect people, and in this instance we come from all political stripes, Liberal, New Democrat, Conservative, we're all in this together. The interests of British Columbians align with the interests of Saskatchewan and Ontario and Quebec on these important issues. And I believe the federal government understands their role. We had a very collaborative relationship through COVID. We were meeting weekly to address the needs of British Columbians wherever they may live. The Prime Minister made a commitment to address the Canada Health transfer after we got through the pandemic. And if we start to come to a place where the pandemic is moved to an endemic and we have more confidence that we can start to address the fundamental challenges within healthcare, I'm confident we'll get an agreement that will meet our needs going forward. So I don't want to imagine what will happen if we don't come to agreement. We will be letting down not just this generation of British Columbians, but generations to come. With respect to Soccer Canada and Iran having a match here in British Columbia, I will leave it to others to comment on that. I know in the Prime Minister in his comments about this was reminded and reflecting on the Canadian lives that were lost when a plane was shot down in Iranian airspace, killing British Columbians. I've met repeatedly with the Iranian community on a range of issues, and this is always front of mind. So I know it will be a difficult time for those families who lost loved ones, and even those who have been constantly following these issues. But I'll leave it to Soccer Canada to discuss how and why this came about.
Next question comes from Richard Zussman, Global News.
Craig James has been found guilty of fraud and breach of trust. Are you surprised, and what sort of punishment do you believe would be fair for the former clerk?
Well, I know that meting out justice is not in my job description, even in the Canadian Federation, so I can't possibly comment on that. But I will say that I'm grateful that a very sad chapter in this institution's history has now been put to rest. It was a difficult time for the people who work here, British Columbians who are passionate and committed to our institutions of democracy, who make this place accessible for countless British Columbians who come to visit to see our democracy in action. And it was definitely a blow to all of those who care about this place. The courts have made their determination, and I'll leave it to them to determine what judgments will flow from that.
Follow-up, Richard?
There continue to be concerns around the workforce in the province, especially when it comes to restaurant and hospitality. The restaurant sector is calling on Ottawa to help fast-track foreign workers to come do some of those jobs. Is that something you'd be willing to advocate for the industry for on behalf of British Columbia? In the past, it took 6 months for the application process. Now it's more than a year. Are you on board with trying to push that ahead to get people here to fill those important jobs that are right now unfilled?
Well, there are shortages, worker shortages in almost every sector. We have a low unemployment rate right now, and despite that, we have more people working today than were working when the pandemic hit us in March of 2020. So there has been an influx of people coming to British Columbia. I've said over the past number of weeks, over 100,000 new British Columbians from across the country and around the world have come in the past 12 months, and more are ready to arrive. We're working with the Ukrainian community here in British Columbia to assist settlement agencies to bring Ukrainian refugees to supplement those who have been arriving from Syria and from Afghanistan over the past number of months and years. And immigration through refugee status is a component part of our plan to ensure we have workers for the challenges ahead. But we also need to, I believe, review our immigration policies, and these are largely, in fact, almost exclusively federal responsibility. I have had difficulty with the foreign worker program in the past because it sets up a relationship with employers that sometimes can lead to very unfortunate stories that have been covered by all of the networks who are represented here today. So I need to have confidence that the temporary foreign worker programs are going to be put in place to protect those who are coming to meet the needs of our community, and that there's a pathway to citizenship or landed status as a result. I believe that we are a province and a country of Indigenous peoples who have been here since time immemorial, and a diversity of people from every corner of the globe that have come here to set up a dynamic, multicultural community that shares and celebrates all of our diversity. We need to keep doing that, and that's how we'll meet some of the labor shortages that are bedeviling not just hospitality, but indeed the entire economy.
Next question, Katie DeRosa, Vancouver Sun.
Premier, the urgent primary care clinics have been touted since 2018 as sort of a team-based model, a way to attach people to family doctors. But in question period, even the West Shore Urgent Primary Care Center has one doctor out of the 7 that it could have. So, you know, short of just having these ribbon cutting ceremonies and announcing these primary care centers, what is being done to make sure that they're staffed so that they can actually help the people they're supposed to?
Well, there's 2 pieces to the primary care network that connects doctors and specialists and providers across the regions, whether they be here in the island or in the Lower Mainland or in the north and the interior. And there are the urgent primary care centers where services are delivered directly to people. And we're facing shortages. We just talked about the hospitality sector, but it's across the economy. We have hired more healthcare professionals in the past 3 years than in the previous 13 years. And despite that, we're still coming up short. That's a direct result of an aging population. The number of doctors we have in our 70s treating the number of patients that are in their 80s have never been as high as they are right now. So we have a large systemic problem that will require large thinking, and that's why it starts with the Canada Health Transfer. If we can address the issue of funding that is sustainable and secure over a long period of time, we can start implementing the types of programs that we talked to the doctors of BC about this week, the types of programs that the Nurses Union have been raising with us, government, for decades, as well as hospital employees that are so critical, from admissions through post-op and out the door. Everybody's needed. And I have to say, from my own recent journey through the healthcare system, to come from my work, which is inherently adversarial and confrontational, to go into a system that is dependent on collaboration was such a breath of fresh air, quite frankly. So that, you know, I didn't see anybody yelling in the hallways about whose fault things were. I saw people collaborating to get outcomes for people. That's what I believe government should do more of, and I want to make sure that we're fully funding our healthcare system to have the appropriate number of professionals to meet the needs of British Columbians.
Follow up, Katie?
Yeah, and on the negotiation with the Doctors of BC, is one of the chief considerations increasing the fee for service that doctors get for visits?
Well, there's alternate payment organizations or systems that are in place now, and we're going to explore others that may be available. The fee-for-service model works for some, it doesn't work for others. There is an imbalance between family doctors and specialists. We need to figure that out. It's more, when you come out of med school, you've got a massive student loan and the prospect of starting a practice, taking on a business, how the overhead that comes with that? Or do I spend a bit more time, get a specialty, get paid more, and just show up to work every day and say, where are my scrubs? Where do I go? So these are basic issues that the doctors of BC are grappling with within their own organization, and to have a relationship with them to get to the root of these issues, I think is the way forward. And I'm very grateful that we had the meeting this week to reset the relationship and to make it abundantly clear to British Columbians and to doctors that we need to work on this together. There was unanimity on that, and I'm confident that we'll be at tables over the next number of weeks to address the concerns that doctors have with a patient-focused approach.
Next question, Shannon Waters, BC Today.
I think my first question is probably for the minister, although Premier, if you want to weigh in, that would be welcome. The report released in October noted that the current royalty regime is very opaque and complex, difficult to understand. The experts were unable to come up with an estimate for the total cost of administering the program, and they weren't able to determine what share of the royalties were being collected. What do the changes that you're announcing do to address that issue, and how are they going to improve transparency and accountability for the royalty regime?
Well, thank you very much for that question. As you mentioned, the system that's in existence now and is going to be changed, very, very hard to understand and very, very efficient. It adds not only to the administrative cost for government, but it adds to the business cost of the companies that are trying to navigate through and calculate how they are going to pay their royalties. So by eliminating the royalties programs that we're going to eliminate, we'll introduce a measure of simplicity and clarity, and actually will shrink down the regulations, although some of them have yet to be written. But the goal is to make that system much more accessible, much more understandable, and I think we all benefit both in a financial way in terms of reducing costs, but also in access to the public, those who are interested in understanding how our system works. And so Dr. Winter and Dr. O'Reilly were very clear that the system was bizarrely complicated and needed major reform, and that's what we're doing.
Follow-up, Shannon?
Yes, and this one is for the Premier. I wanted to go back to spending priorities and some of the concerns that British Columbians are voicing in the wake of the announcement around the museum project. BC continues to experience a horrific number of deaths due to the illicit drug supply. 2020 was the worst year on record. 2021 was then the worst year on record. 2022 has had some very bad months, some improvement recently, possibly. Your government didn't announce any new money to deal with this crisis in this year's budget. So I'm curious whether you think that the province's current policies are going to mean fewer British Columbians die due to the illicit drug supply this year. And if not, why you're not doing more.
We're in the middle of finalizing decriminalization discussions with the federal government to remove simple possession of opioids from the criminal code within British Columbia. That has been an ongoing discussion. The only province to have a safe supply program for prescribed alternatives to street drugs. These are steps that are just underway. We also are building more recovery beds than have been built in a decade and a half. So the investments that are already in the system, I believe, will be to the credit of those who work on the front lines to keep people alive, whether they be in the healthcare system, firefighters, paramedics, others at harm reduction facilities. I believe we're doing our best to meet the need in the community, but we have a more toxic drug supply than we've ever had before. There was concern during the pandemic that supply chains for those who traffic and prey on the vulnerability of British Columbians would be declining, but instead we've now got a domestic industry of more poisonous, more toxic products than we had before. So that means the 4-pillar approach needs to have a whole bunch of components in it, including enforcement. I think the public is demanding that, as they are more access to recovery. Those are our focuses among the myriad of things that we're doing. We also have struck the Parliamentary Committee on Health, the Standing Committee, to walk the walk. If everyone wants to work on this together, let's do that, for goodness sakes. And we've had preliminary hearings underway, and there'll be more work to be done there. We continue to engage Minister Malcolmson with our federal counterparts to have them fully understand that this is a national issue. Again, I feel I'm talking a lot about the federal government, but they have such a critical role to play in some of the most challenging issues we have in British Columbia.
For the last question today, we'll go to the phone lines. Please go ahead, Lisa Usda, City News 1130.
Hi there, Premier. I'm wondering, ahead of the tragic anniversary, Kamloops next week, is there a chance, or what is being done to make Reconciliation Day a statutory holiday?
We've had discussions about that in Cabinet. I can't, sadly, Lisa, I can't give you an update on that from this podium, but I'm happy to go back and see where we're at on that and give you a call if you wanted to have some tape. I can't give you an answer at the moment. I know we've had the discussion, and other provinces are doing that as well.
Lisa, do you have a follow-up?
That's a free one.
Yeah, that would be great to get tape on that. Also, as a follow-up, when it comes to the $1 billion project at the museum, and you're saying that, you don't want people to hear that it sounds out of touch, but you understand when people didn't know about this at all, the frustration and insult, I think, that a lot of people feel when they're struggling to pay for so many things and they see this money being used. I wonder if you can talk to those people who just aren't hearing what they need to hear.
Well, again, it's with profound regret that we've launched this initiative for all British Columbians, not just this generation, but generations to come. And it landed with such a thud. We have been talking about this for 5 years publicly. We announced an engagement process in 2019. Regrettably, the global pandemic got in the way of that, and we've been focusing not just government but the media on covering those issues as they emerge. And we continue to methodically do what governments do to address a range of funding issues. But I absolutely understand that if you're at home at your kitchen table trying to figure out how you're going to meet your bills, and you hear of a significant capital project, that would grate you. But I also know that we need to do a whole bunch of things at the same time. That's the responsibility of government. And in that series of responsibilities is being accountable when something goes thud. I very much regret this. I am very proud of the RBC Museum and the programs that they deliver, as well as their patience as they brought forward to successive governments the challenge that they face in protecting our collective heritage, as well as continuing to be a marquee tourism destination. So again, I very much regret that it landed with a thud, but I do believe as we look at the plan, and again, this is an opportunity to explain to British Columbians that we take in money on an annual basis to provide for health care, for education, mostly salaries to people who deliver the important services that we want. And we also take money and we borrow it, not unlike a household budget. You don't want to borrow money to buy your groceries, but if you have a hole in the roof, you go to the bank, you say, I need a loan, I'm going to put a new roof on my house, and over time that increases the value of your asset. That's what we're doing with the tourism sector in southern Vancouver Island, indeed for all British Columbia, because we're investing in our future. That's what capital is supposed to do. Better roads, better infrastructure, which includes tourism infrastructure. So I believe if we've got time to tell the story, British Columbians will understand that this is a long-term project that won't be paid for tomorrow. It'll be paid over time, just as we are paying for new schools, new hospitals in every corner of the province, seismically upgrading those schools that are coming to us in priority order from school boards across the province, and we're going as fast as we can. Could we do more? Sure we could. And that's my mission, to do that every day.
Thank you very much. That concludes today's availability.
Thanks. Good to see everybody. Nice to see so many of you in one place. No puppies, no babies next week.